I can't believe I'm the only one without food. That's just cruel, mother-in-law.
As the eldest son's wife yells, she covers her face with both hands, her eyes brimming with tears. Just as her words imply, all that's in front of her is an empty glass and a solitary fork. The relatives seem to finally catch on to the situation and begin to jeer one after another. Whoa! Could this be Emily's debut of tormenting her daughter-in-law?
I'm on Team Naomi. Ghost mother-in-law, stop the torment. Begone, evil spirit.
Dear daughter-in-law, don't cry. It's a mix of 10% concern and 90% just messing around. I shrug my shoulders at the relatives who are starting to get tipsy from the drinks. For them, the discord between me and the eldest son's wife might just be another piece of entertainment at the New Year's celebration. In that case, as the host, I need to entertain our guests even more. Of course, this includes the very person who caused this situation, the eldest son's wife.
All right. I'll go get Naomi's portion too, so just wait a moment.
With resolution, I clutch a tray to my chest and head back to the kitchen. My name is Emily Johnson, 62 years old. After losing my beloved husband 2 years ago and my eldest son moving out after getting married a year ago, I've been living alone in this house. I can't say I don't feel lonely, but as someone who enjoys her own company, living alone isn't particularly hard for me. That's why I've been politely declining every time my eldest son invites me to live with him. I didn't want to intrude on his newlywed life and, fortunately, I have a lot of relatives living nearby, so I haven't been lonely. However, I would later come to understand the real meaning behind my son's persistent invitations to live together. It was an SOS from my eldest son.
Mom, please come help me right away.
It was one night, a few months after my eldest son got married. My eldest son suddenly called me. It was dinner time, and I was just about to eat my meal. What's the matter? Why are you calling at this time?
I'll explain later. For now, it's an emergency. I hate to impose, but can you come to my house right away?
Getting a sudden call without any explanation left me briefly perplexed. My eldest son's house was located in the neighboring county. It wasn't an impossible distance to cover right now, but it wasn't exactly around the corner either. Still, something in my eldest son's demeanor told me this was no ordinary matter, so I decided to put my dinner on hold and head to his house. What I found there was something I'll probably never forget. Part of the kitchen in their newly built house had been blackened by soot. The smell of burning and heat filled the air, and remnants of foam from a fire extinguisher were still scattered here and there. And right next to that kitchen, my daughter-in-law was crying inconsolably.
What on earth happened here?
Well, we had a bit of a fire. Naomi was so upset, I had to call you. I hate to ask, but could you help us clean up? According to my son, my daughter-in-law was cooking dinner when suddenly a pillar of fire shot up from the pan. I managed to put out the fire in the pan with a wet rag, but sparks flew and ignited the surroundings. I used the fire extinguisher to take care of the rest, but it made a mess of the kitchen. While he was telling me this, I noticed that he was holding an ice pack to his arm. It seems he had burned himself while putting out the fire. I decided to postpone cleaning the kitchen and started tending to my son's burn. Luckily, the burn wasn't severe, but this could have been a major disaster. Perhaps it's a blessing that this was the extent of the damage.
Is Naomi all right? Did she get burned or anything?
I'm fine. She didn't seem to have any burns as far as I could see. But Naomi was the one cooking, and it seemed strange that she was unharmed given the fierceness of the fire. When I asked about this, I found out the cause of the fire. Naomi, it seems, was scared of oil splattering when she was frying frozen croquettes. After some hesitation, she tossed a few croquettes from the edge of the kitchen into the pan. This caused the oil to splatter, and when the heated oil reached its limit, it ignited the gas stove, causing a pillar of fire. I was so scared. I'm afraid of frying stuff. My daughter-in-law continued sobbing. Even though she was shaken, it would have been nice if she could at least help with her husband's first aid. As I cleaned the kitchen, I let out a small sigh. In the end, cleaning the kitchen took about 3 hours. I ended up catching the last train home, and throughout that time, my daughter-in-law did nothing to help with the cleaning. She just kept complaining about how my favorite pot and I had a hard time choosing the kitchen wallpaper. Could it be that my daughter-in-law is bad at cooking? That suspicion turned into certainty a few months later, on my birthday. At my age, my own birthday isn't exactly a special day. It's more of a moment to reflect on getting another year older. Without my husband, I didn't feel any desire to be celebrated, so I planned to spend the day leisurely enjoying my hobby of cooking. But, unexpectedly, I received another invitation from my son and his wife. They wanted to treat me to dinner to celebrate my birthday and to apologize for the previous incident. With that in mind, I decided to visit my son's house once again. But there, I found myself embroiled in another unforgettable incident.
What dish is this supposed to be?
I looked at the object piled high on the plate before me, hesitating before I asked. If I had to describe it as is, I would say it resembles a lump of coal that's on fire. Anyone would think the same if they saw the small, black lump sitting atop a heap of carelessly torn raw cabbage.
Eh? Don't you recognize it? It's fried chicken. Christmas is coming up, so I thought it would be a surprise. Believe it or not, I've been working hard to conquer my fear of deep frying.
My eldest son's wife puffed out her chest as if to say, "Impressive, right?" Upon hearing this, I sent a quick glance towards the kitchen. Despite the lingering signs of a fire incident, it seemed that a major catastrophe like last time was avoided. If my eldest son's wife, who was once terrified of frying, had managed to overcome her fears, then surely it was something worthy of praise. But then,
Fried chicken.
I gazed down once again at the black lump before me. Upon closer examination, I could see spots that had turned a brownish hue from being fried. Perhaps she'd been overly cautious due to her fear of frying, causing it to char. Even if it was burned, it must still taste good, right? Despite my attempts at self-reassurance, it was a tough sell. But refusing to eat was not an option. Looking at my eldest son, who was nervously hanging his head beside his excited wife, I braced myself to take a bite. The true value of a dish is not in its appearance. After all, my daughter-in-law had gone to the trouble of preparing this for me. I couldn't just dismiss her effort. So, I mustered the courage to bite into the lump. Ignoring the burnt smell, I chewed. The outer shell, which felt like charcoal, made a crunching noise and crumbled, revealing the rubbery texture of the meat underneath, filling my mouth. It was a taste unlike any I've experienced before. What had she used to marinate it? It was incredibly sweet. And the burnt parts were bitter. Honestly, I wanted to spit it out right away. Despite the unpleasant taste, I somehow managed to swallow it with the help of some water and mustered up a smile. Oh, it's tasty. Probably the hardest I've ever worked to say anything in my life. My efforts seemed to pay off as my daughter-in-law beamed with joy. It's a common story on daytime TV, a mother-in-law criticizing her daughter-in-law's cooking leading to family discord. A single offhand comment from the mother-in-law can place the son in the middle of the dispute, which could lead to the breakdown of the marriage. But it seems like I've managed to dodge that bullet. Just as I let out a sigh of relief, my daughter-in-law mercilessly placed the next dish before me. She described it as a seafood soup, but seeing the raw shrimp in the overflowing green liquid, I felt a bit dizzy. Now, I find myself in the hospital, getting in for drip. My memory is a bit fuzzy for the 2 to 3 days after the dinner party, but it seems I was found collapsed at home due to severe abdominal pain and dehydration. A relative who happened to visit found me and took me to the hospital. The doctor told me it was food poisoning caused by a bacterium called Campylobacter. When asked if I'd eaten any undercooked chicken, everything fell into place. Fried chicken. Remembering that hellish texture and flavor, a shiver ran down my spine. And I became convinced. My eldest son's wife's cooking is beyond just bad. My son is in danger. Something must be done, and soon. While I was recovering, I got in touch with my son and found out he was in the hospital with food poisoning. Both husband and wife were bedridden, or so I thought. It turned out Naomi hadn't eaten any of the food she had cooked, and she was perfectly fine.
Naomi doesn't eat her own cooking?
I asked.
I'm not sure about during the day, but she's on some sort of diet for breakfast and dinner. Always eating salads and smoothies. That's why she probably doesn't realize how disastrous her cooking is.
My son explained.
But she must at least taste it, right?
I argued.
I don't know if she doesn't taste it or if she just can't tell it's bad.
Either way, I'm at a loss. He replied.
So you've been eating that food all this time? It's okay to have different tastes, but it's definitely bad for your health. Why not excuse yourself from it from now on?
I suggested. While giving this advice, I had a change of heart. It might be difficult. When she caused the small fire, Naomi never apologized to the end and only complained. Even if we pointed out her poor cooking skills, she might not admit her faults. Worse, she might become agitated. My son seemed to understand this as well, and laughed as if he had given up.
At first, I couldn't stand the bad food and always wanted to live with you. But even if we live together now, Naomi has high pride and won't relinquish the kitchen. She even gets furious when I try to cook. I was careless and got food poisoning this time, but recently I've learned to defend myself enough to avoid being hospitalized. Don't worry,
he assured me.
Really?
I said. Even so, there's no way it's healthy for him to keep eating food that doesn't suit his palate. As a small aid, I asked my son to bring Naomi to our home for the New Year's celebration. Many relatives would come, and it wouldn't be a problem if the number of people increased by 2. I would cook a feast with my skills. My son was happy to accept the offer, looking forward to my home-cooked meals. I'm glad. I could potentially teach Naomi some cooking under the pretense of giving her recipes for any dishes she liked. But reality took an unexpected turn. After celebrating the new year with my son and his wife who came over on New Year's Eve, I woke up in the morning to find the dishes I had prepared over several days completely changed. When I went to the kitchen and saw the catastrophe, everything went dark before my eyes.
Good morning, Mom. Thank you for the delicious dinner last night. As a thank you, I helped with the New Year's celebration dishes you had prepared,
Naomi said with a laugh.
Helped? You mean this? This isn't a prank,
I exclaimed.
No way, Mom. I would never prank you. I just made a few tweaks. Party food can be boring if it's always the same, right? I thought a change like this might be good,
Naomi responded, grinning innocently. I was speechless in front of her smile. But I felt like something was falling apart under me. All the dishes I had spent days preparing for today. I had procured only the freshest of ingredients. In honor of the new year, I had even splurged on some usually pricey items. Now, they were just glorified garbage. Ignoring my eldest daughter-in-law's gleeful explanations, I dug around hoping to find something, anything that was salvageable. In the end, everything I had prepared was ruined. The only things unscathed were pre-packaged foods, beverages, and a few ingredients. On top of that, there simply wasn't enough time to start all over.
Kai, I hate to ask this, but can you head to any open supermarket right now and grab anything that we could serve at the table?
It's New Year's Day. Chances of finding any party food left on shelves, those that usually require pre-ordering, would be slim. Even so, I just needed something, anything that could serve as a side dish. Kai, my eldest son, understanding my predicament, immediately agreed to run the errands. In the end, I managed to plate up a few dishes using the store-bought deli items and the leftover ingredients we had, successfully saving face, at least in appearances. Of course, during all this, I didn't let my daughter-in-law anywhere near the kitchen. Compared to the feast I had planned, it was pitiful, but I had no other choice. As long as we could get through today, that's all that mattered. Just as I thought that, my invited relatives started to arrive one after the other.
Happy New Year! Thanks again for the invite. I've been looking forward to Emily's cooking all year.
Long time no see, Kai and Naomi. How have you been? The relatives greeted each other and took their seats at the table. We began with communion wine for the toast, but soon everyone switched to their preferred beers and started eating while enjoying their conversations. They were so engrossed in their chats that no one seemed to notice the unusual dishes in front of them. My eldest daughter-in-law, who was kicked out of the kitchen early, was sulking at the table, still not quite comprehending the situation. Then she noticed that there was no plate of deli food in front of her. She looked up at me.
Mother-in-law, my portion is…
There's no portion for you. While poking at the plate in front of me, I replied curtly. The relatives, sensing the tense atmosphere, stopped their chatters. Taking advantage of the sudden attention, my daughter-in-law dramatically filled her eyes with tears and covered her face with her hands.
It's cruel not to serve me food while everyone else has theirs. This is too much, mother-in-law.
As her words suggested, in front of my daughter-in-law was only an empty glass and a lone fork. The relatives seemed to finally catch on to the situation, beginning to jeer one after another.
Oh. Is this Emily's debut as the wicked mother-in-law? All right. I'm rooting for Naomi. Mother-in-law from hell, stop your bullying. Out with the evil spirits.
Stay strong, bride. It seemed a 10% worry and 90% mischief mix. As I shrugged at the relatives, already tipsy from the booze, I realized for them, the friction between me and the eldest son's wife was nothing more than New Year's entertainment. As the host, I had to entertain the guests further, even the main instigator of this situation. The eldest son's wife was no exception. Can't be helped.
I'll bring Naomi's share too, so just wait a bit.
Resolute, I hugged the tray to my chest and returned to the kitchen. Before long, I returned to the living room with an oval platter in hand. It was a seafood platter. The relatives loved seafood. So this platter was something I had reserved a month in advance for this very day. Both the relatives and the eldest son's wife probably thought that another dish was being brought out for each of them. They were surprised by the sudden appearance of a large dish, but of course, I meant the part arranged by the eldest son's wife. But there was no way they could understand that. The eldest son's wife, in particular, looked pleased, probably thinking it was finally time to showcase the dish she had arranged.
Oh. We've been waiting. What's this, seafood as well? I was thinking there was surprisingly little variety this year.
Looks delicious, let's dig in. As soon as I set it on the table, The relatives' forks extended towards it. But, predictably, as soon as they put the seafood in their mouths, screams echoed from everywhere.
Ack! What on earth is this? Sweet seafood!
Relatives began visibly grimacing and reaching for water. That was hardly surprising. The seafood platter was heavily dressed in honey. Conceivably, a seasoned chef might successfully combine seafood and honey, but the creative touch was unfortunately added by the eldest son's wife. There was undoubtedly some other unfathomable ingredient mixed in. Naomi tweaked the recipe for you all. Right?
Yes. I got the idea from a maple syrup salmon poke bowl.
But it wasn't just honey. The oysters were topped with caramel sauce, and the crab was sprinkled with tiny golden pieces of paper. Upon closer inspection, they were actually pieces of origami.
It's for the New Year's celebration. Don't you often see it in full-course meals?
Well, those usually come with edible gold leaf. Not paper that can't be eaten. Seems like the relatives agreed. All of them put down their forks with strained expressions. They must have expected the dish to be met with high praise. The relatives awkwardly explained. Naomi, you do have a sweet tooth. We, on the other hand, prefer spicy food. Naomi, you do have a sweet tooth. We, on the other hand, prefer spicy food. While the eldest son's wife dropped her shoulders in disappointment. Next, I served the homemade roast beef. It was one of my husband's favorites and a long-standing dish in our family. However, even when I placed the large pot of it on the table, no one reached out with their forks. It made sense. No one could explain why the roast beef was stewing in a pot. Except for the eldest son's wife, of course.
I found this big chunk of meat, so I decided to stew it in red wine. Doesn't it look tasty? Please, help yourselves.
So that was it. The unnaturally dark color was from the red wine. However, it was clear from the smell that the alcohol hadn't been cooked off, and the color was far from being produced by red wine alone. At least, it looked like it was mixed with powdered chili or bean paste. Or it might have been colored with paint. It wouldn't be out of character for the eldest son's wife. And it wasn't funny.
You all mentioned earlier that you like spicy food, right? This should pair well with your drinks. Go on, go on.
Having just rejected her previous dish, the relatives likely felt they couldn't escape this time. They hesitantly picked out the once roast beef from the pot and took a bite. Then, screams echoed again. From their repeated calls for water, it seemed it was too spicy this time.
This is ridiculous. What kind of a sick joke is this? This isn't fit for human consumption. Even dog food is better than this.
Finally, it seemed they had reached their limit. One after another, harsh words were hurled at the eldest son's wife. Upon witnessing the relatives' reactions, the eldest son's wife finally understood the harsh criticism her creative dish received, and she burst into tears.
You're all so cruel. I worked so hard on this. Turning mom's cooking into garbage and then complaining about it, unbelievable.
The eldest son glared at his wife in disgust. This roast beef was a dish that the eldest son often enjoyed, making his anger even more potent.
You turned it into garbage. So this was originally Emily's cooking?
That's correct. Everything on that plate is store-bought. Naomi turned all the chicken noodle soup and party foods I prepared in advance into waste, so I had no choice but to buy these.
Waste. Such a term.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I should have said poison, considering what was found next to the pot.
I held up an empty spice bottle for everyone to see. The label read nutmeg. A common spice, typically used in meat dishes. As of last night, this bottle was unopened. meaning that Naomi must have dumped the entire bottle into the pot.
Do you know? Nutmeg is a wonderful spice that can make meat dishes delicious in small amounts, but it can actually be poisonous. There have been instances of people dying from overdosing. The lethal dose is only 10 g. The most common poison, isn't it? No way! By the way, this bottle contains 15 g. Considering all of it was dumped into the pot, if you finished eating, it's certainly enough to invite death. Stop joking! Are you trying to send us to the hospital?
Accusations turned into shouts of anger as the reality of nearly being served poison on top of food worse than dog food set in. Overwhelmed, Naomi began crying and pleading.
But I didn't know. Nutmeg goes with meat, right? I just wanted to make it tastier. It's not my fault. Yeah, you said the same thing before. You didn't know about Campylobacter. Nobody taught you. Yeah, that's right. You never learned the basics of cooking from anyone, didn't listen to any advice, didn't even properly read a cookbook. You just cook on a whim, not even tasting your own food. That's why you end up making garbage.
At her husband's harsh words, Naomi stopped crying. She probably thought her husband would side with her. But he mercilessly called the dish garbage and turned to the relatives. He seemed still angry that the relatives had deemed me a demon mother-in-law without knowing the full story.
Now you understand why my mother didn't serve Naomi food. She ruined my mother's cooking. And she's not even remorseful about it. There's no need to prepare a decent meal for someone like that. Isn't that right? If you still side with Naomi, I will cut ties with you all here and now.
Faced with the eldest son's reasonable argument, the relatives bowed their heads in silence. As if to drive the point home, when I asked, "Would you like seconds?" and moved the meat closer, the relatives screamed, backed away, and some even fell from their chairs. As I remained silent, they eventually began to mutter apologies in dry voices. After that, the remorseful relatives ate only the original store-bought dishes, and each of them went home, each with words of apology. The eldest son's wife tried to sneak away amidst the chaos, but my son and I didn't miss it. We made sure she sat down and took responsibility for the mess she'd created. And of course, that meant making sure she ate her own creation. As a result, she's now in the hospital. She could only manage a few bites of any of the dishes. While it was a bit unsatisfying from my perspective, I think it was a good opportunity for her to learn just how outrageous her cooking was. Afterwards, I was left with the problem of dealing with the leftovers. After some thought, I decided to take them with me when I visited my eldest son's wife in the hospital. I figured if I showed them to her doctor, they'd understand the cause of her illness. However, I had the good fortune to bump into her parents who were also visiting. As things naturally played out, I ended up handing the leftovers to them. As a result, upon discharge, my eldest son's wife was immediately sent back to live with her parents. Her parents apologized profusely, saying things like, "We had no idea she was feeding Kai such horrible things, and we don't need any money for medical expenses. If you want to divorce, we're okay with that." So, my son and I, who had been harboring resentment all this while, finally felt like we could let it go. And as for our relatives, they lavished us with expensive meats, fine liquors, and fresh fish as an apology. When I said it was too much for me alone to eat, they suggested we start the New Year celebration anew, which made my son and I burst out laughing.
"You know, it's just not the New Year without Emily's cooking,"
they said. Those words warmed my heart. After all, the purpose of cooking is to bring joy to others. So, I will continue to hone my skills and make those who look forward to my cooking smile.
Your cooking makes me want to vomit.
Flora, my son's wife, whispered this only for me to hear, but I ignored it. Today is my grandson Frederick's birthday party, and we're planning to celebrate it grandly with relatives invited. I didn't want to be swayed by just Flora's opinion. Without minding her, I carried a large platter with meatloaf next. Seeing this, Flora stood up and started yelling loudly.
Seriously, what is this? You expect us to eat that? Such tasteless, vulgar food, I don't want to eat it. I've had enough.
Flora grabbed the large platter of meatloaf from my hands and slammed it onto the table with force. The relatives looked at Flora with surprised faces. The dish shattered into pieces, and the scattered food stained the clothes of the relatives, who started angrily blaming Flora. My son David also stood up and put his hand on Flora's shoulder to calm her down.
Hey, Flora. Calm down. You be quiet. Why are there so many country bumpkins here? I'm so sick of it. I feel like vomiting. I shouldn't have come.
She then picked up a plate of food left on the table and threw it at me. I felt more disgusted than angry at Flora's behavior.
You seem to be mistaken, but I didn't make this. Huh? Then who made this crap? It was me.
The voice was so loud it seemed impossible it came from an elderly person, and the glass doors shook. I'm Ashley. Born into an ordinary family, I spent my life without any particular incidents. I did well enough in studies, so I didn't have trouble getting into college. In university, surrounded by good friends, I had a fun college life and graduated without issue. I found a job at a local company, and during my busy days, I met the man who would become my husband. It seemed we both had love at first sight. We started dating immediately, and about a month later, decided to get married. My husband was a wonderful person, and I was very proud of him. Our family and friends blessed us, and we had our wedding ceremony without delay, and soon after, I gave birth to our son David. It was my first time parenting, but it wasn't hard because my mother Morgan helped. I thought about how smooth and trouble-free my life had been. But maybe I was getting complacent. Gradually, I began to find life boring. That's when people tend to fall into life's pitfalls. It started when my husband's returns home began to get late. Then his business trips unnaturally increased, and he was away from home more and more. I tried to ignore the doubts swelling in my heart, clinging to the sweet illusion that he wouldn't do such things, but the reality was cruel. I found out he was having affairs with several women. When one of their husbands came to confront him at our home. At first, my husband didn't admit his guilt, but as evidence piled up, he cried like a child. Eventually, we divorced, and I became a single mother, raising David. At that moment, I felt as if my life had ended. I had lived without hardships, never stumbling, so I had no strength to resist. Because I was complacent, I couldn't even consult with friends. I desperately wanted help, but weird pride got in the way. However, parents are there to help in such times. My mother didn't blame or comfort me. She just said,
Ashley, you have me and your friends. But David only has you.
Over the phone. With those words, I resolved to raise David properly. To do that, I decided to throw away all my silly pride, rely on others, and raise David with the help of many people. My son never had serious injuries or illnesses, and his grades were excellent. He went on to high school, the local university, and graduated safely. He got a job in a local company, moved out, and became independent. When I looked around David's empty room, I couldn't help but cry. There was loneliness, but more than that, a sense of accomplishment. But there was one thing I worried about for David. Like me, he had never faced any major failures. If he encountered a significant setback in life, could he endure it? That was my only concern, but I was prepared to support David when the time came. After David became independent, I terminated the house lease and decided to return to my parents' house. It was too big for one person and felt lonely, and with my father passed away, I was worried about my elderly mother being alone. But returning home, I realized my worries were unnecessary. My mother was as energetic as ever, bustling around.
Ashley, if you're bored, get moving. Make some money.
All right, I got it. In this way, it feels more like I'm the one being taken care of by my mother. Still, she seemed happy I came back, and when there was no work, we'd spend time together, reminiscing about the old days. A short while after David became independent, he called me.
Mom, it's been a while. How are ya?
I'm fine, thanks. What's up all of a sudden? Is something wrong? Since David had lived at home and rarely stayed out, having a phone conversation felt somewhat fresh.
I was thinking of spending my summer vacation at home.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Though, don't expect any special treatment. Despite saying that, I was really happy inside. I wanted to ask about his job and how his social relationships were going.
Then, I'll call you again when I'm coming back.
Sure, I'll be looking forward to it. Be careful on your way here. After hanging up, I immediately started planning in my head. The room over there should be fine, but it needs to be cleaned up. And I need to think about what to cook too. As I was talking to myself, my mother approached me.
David's coming back? We'll need to prepare quite a bit then.
My mother seemed motivated knowing her grandson was coming. Mom, he's my son, so I'll do the preparations.
What are you talking about? That boy loves what I make. I absolutely want to make it for him.
Once this happens, my mother won't listen to anything else. We prepared the room so David could relax comfortably and went shopping for groceries. Having something to look forward to is a good thing. It makes the heart light, and somehow, the scenery around seems brighter. And finally, the summer vacation arrived. We went to pick up David from the station and headed home. Seeing David after a long time, he had matured, turning into a full-fledged man. My mother was waiting eagerly at home. We rejoiced at our reunion. The dining table was filled with dishes made by my mother and I. We talked and caught up while eating, and time flew by quickly. When the conversation settled down a bit,
David, have you found someone nice?
My mother suddenly asked. David blushed and looked down. Maybe he really had found someone. The thought made my heart race uncontrollably. David, don't tell me you really have.
Yeah, actually, I've recently started dating someone.
My mother and I were overjoyed and cheered loudly. The conversation then centered around his girlfriend. David, though embarrassed, answered our questions properly. It seems she works at the same company, and they hit it off right away.
Actually, I came back to tell you that. Eventually, I'm thinking of marrying her.
Really? Oh, that makes me so happy.
What a wonderful summer vacation this turned out to be.
Next time, I'll bring her over. I want to introduce her, he said shyly, looking somewhat young to me, reminding me he's always my son. After a delightful summer vacation, half a year later, in winter, it happened. As promised, David brought his girlfriend to our home. The outside was covered in snow, a stark contrast to the summer vacation. My mother and I sat facing David and his girlfriend with serious expressions. All right, this is my girlfriend, Flora. She greeted us.
Nice to meet you. I'm Flora.
Her first impression was of a polite lady. She seemed a bit shy, but her words were careful, and her expression was kind. I liked Flora right away.
Thank you for choosing David.
Well, sure. At first, our conversation was a bit awkward. But after a while, the tension eased, and we all started to enjoy the conversation. Seeing them sitting together, I thought they really suited each other. And so I teased them.
You two really are a good match. Why not get married soon?
But this wasn't a joke. I genuinely thought they should marry. They were embarrassed, but they didn't seem to mind.
No, Mom, if you say so, maybe we should just go ahead and get the marriage certificate now.
Hee, shall we go get it now? We joked like this. Then, after a while, the two of them got married. The wedding ceremony was very glamorous, and I felt incredibly happy. But there was a small worry in my heart. For some reason, I kept remembering the time I divorced my husband. even though I know David's different. And Flora is a wonderful person too. Yet, I couldn't shake off this unpleasant feeling. Contrary to my worries, their married life was going smoothly. Soon, Flora got pregnant and Frederick was born. Being my first grandchild, he was so adorable. Looking at Frederick, I thought my worries were finally disappearing. But it was around that time things started to get strange. After giving birth, Flora somehow started to avoid me. I initially thought it was because she was not feeling well after the birth. Yet, when I tried to help her out,
Ashley, don't touch Frederick,
she would scream loudly. And not just that. Every time I tried to do something,
don't. I'll take care of it. Ashley, don't interfere. Why are you doing things on your own? Stop it. Enough is enough.
She would snap at me, leaving me utterly confused. Sure, nobody likes to be meddled with, but her reaction seemed a bit excessive. It felt as if she thought of me as some virus or something, which truly hurt me. So, I decided to distance myself from Flora for a while. I thought she might calm down, and things would return to normal after some time. Time passed, but Flora never contacted me. Despite having my first grandchild, I couldn't hold him. I wanted to see Frederick's face and have a good talk with David and Flora. But they never came to visit me. My mother seemed somewhat concerned too. I thought about calling them myself, but recalling Flora's yelling made it hard for me to gather the courage. However, I couldn't stand it anymore and decided to visit Flora. Of course, I knew showing up at her house without an appointment was rude, but I wanted to see them so badly. I prepared immediately and headed for Flora's house. I knew it was in a residential area near the station, so I drove there, following the map app. It was the middle of summer, and the trees in the park were lush. I reminisced about the summer vacation when David came back. I was happy when I heard about Flora, but I never imagined things would turn out like this. Thoughts of my husband flickered through my mind. Get out of my head already. Mumbling to myself, I kept driving. A few minutes later, I arrived at Flora's house. After parking my car in front, I walked towards her house. I could feel my heartbeat. And that's how nervous I was. I pressed the doorbell of Flora's house. After a while, Flora's voice came through the intercom.
Who is it? Flora, it's me, Ashley. Sorry for showing up unannounced.
I tried to speak gently, hoping not to upset Flora. But such consideration was wasted on Flora. As soon as she heard my voice, she became hostile.
What? Why are you here?
I was worried you might be having a hard time.
Shut up! Who asked you to come? Leave!
But I wanted to see Frederick's face, and…
Shut up! Shut up! If you don't leave, I'll call the police.
No matter what I said, Flora wouldn't listen. Fearing she would call the police, I had no choice but to leave. Walking back alone, I headed towards a nearby park. I wanted to see Frederick even for a moment, so I thought of calling Flora to persuade her. It was a hot time in summer, so the park was deserted. I sat on a bench in the shade and called Flora. Hello, Flora?
What is it now? You are creepy.
Please, I just want to talk.
Shut up. There's nothing to talk about.
Flora was hysterical as ever. I tried not to be overwhelmed by her voice, attempting to persuade her. I just want to spend a little time together.
Give me a break. I'm so fed up. Let me tell you, I've hated you, Ashley, from the start.
Flora threw such harsh words at me, it was hard to believe she was the same person. Hate? Did I do something?
It's your existence. It's just so lonely. That's why you have a divorce history.
That's irrelevant, isn't it? I was outraged, as her words were far too cruel.
Even if you hate me, we're family since you married, aren't we? That's no way to talk. Family? Don't make me laugh. I didn't want to work, so I just wanted to get married quickly and be supported by a husband. It just happened to be David.
Oh, stop it.
Saying such things, you're the worst, you know? Shut up! Shut up! Don't you ever call me again! Go spend your remaining years in the countryside.
With that, Flora hung up. I couldn't move for a while. Shocked by how terrible she was and angry at myself for not seeing through her, but it was too late for regrets. Feeling down, I left the park, got into my car, and drove home. I thought about contacting David, but I didn't want to burden him with unnecessary worries since he was busy with work. I asked my mother to listen to my complaints. However, I vented to my mother. Time will change things. We just have to trust the person David chose, my mother said reassuringly. So, I decided to be patient. Time passed, and Frederick was about to turn 3. I called David.
David? It's been a while.
Mom, sorry I haven't been in touch. I've been really busy.
It's okay. But I want to see Frederick too, and next month is his birthday, right? I'd love to celebrate it at our house.
Frederick would love that. Let me see if I can arrange some time off. David was unaware of what had happened between me and Flora. So, he readily agreed to my suggestion. I could hear David and Flora talking in the background over the phone. She seemed reluctant to see me. But after some persuasion from David, it sounded like she agreed. Flora's okay with it. So, we'll come over next month.
Great. I'm so happy. Can we invite the relatives too? Make it a big celebration?
Of course. Sorry to trouble you.
No trouble at all. I'll be looking forward to it.
I was thrilled to finally see David and his family, so I immediately shared the news with my mother.
So, they're coming back? Then I'll have to cook up a storm.
My mother said, eager to get started. I enthusiastically contacted relatives to invite them to Frederick's birthday party. Time flew, and soon it was the day of the party. It was spring, and colorful flowers bloomed around our house. As relatives arrived, David's family did too. Frederick, now 3, walked in on his own.
Frederick, nice to meet you. I'm your grandmother.
I bent down to get a good look at Frederick's face. But he seemed frightened by the unfamiliar face and hid behind Flora. Oh dear, I'm sorry. That must have scared you.
Don't worry. He'll get used to it soon.
That's all right. You must be tired. Please, rest inside. David and his family headed to the entrance. All the relatives were smiling. Only Flora was glaring at me. It seemed our silent conflict was ongoing, but I tried not to mind. Especially since Frederick was so adorable. The living room had a large table set up for the gathering of relatives. I brought out the dishes my mother and I had prepared.
Man, it's been a while since I've had Grandma and your cooking. I'm gonna eat a lot.
Frederick looked curiously at the food, but Flora frowned and looked down. As I approached, she whispered so only I could hear.
Just the thought of eating something you made makes me want to vomit.
I was a bit angry, but chose to ignore her. I didn't want to be swayed by just Flora's opinion. Flora seemed even more upset than before for ignoring her, and with a louder voice, she said, I just don't feel like eating. Then, the relatives looked at Flora with puzzled expressions.
Hey, don't say things like that. Are you tired or something?
David also seemed to feel it was not good, trying to calm Flora down with a joke. Flora turned away with a sullen face. I didn't mind and carried over a large platter with meatloaf on it. Upon seeing this, Flora stood up and began to yell loudly.
What is this? You expect me to eat that?
The relatives looked at Flora in surprise. But she, paying no attention to them, shouted loudly.
I don't want to eat such tasteless, vulgar food. I've had enough.
Flora took the platter of meatloaf from my hands and slammed it onto the table with force. The dish shattered, and the scattered food soiled the clothes of the relatives, who angrily blamed Flora. David stood up, trying to calm Flora by placing his hand on her shoulder. However, she still glared at me.
This is peasant food. It's not fit for humans to eat. It's fish feed. Hey, Flora. Calm down. You be quiet. Why are there so many country bumpkins here anyway? I'm so sick of it. I wish I hadn't come.
She grabbed a plate of food left on the table and threw it at me. Her behavior was far from sane. I felt more creeped out than angry at such a sight of Flora.
It seems you're misunderstanding, but I didn't make this. Huh? Then who made this crap? It was me.
My mother answered loudly to Flora's question.
Really, what's all the fuss about? Ruining a perfectly good meal. Are you even a parent, Flora?
My mother's voice was so loud, it seemed impossible for someone of advanced age, making the glass doors tremble. However, Flora was unyielding.
I don't care who made it. Don't serve such vulgar food. What kind of harassment is this? Listen, this meatloaf is David's favorite. Your behavior is far more rude. Shut up. The vulgar ones are you guys. Ignorant country bumpkins.
Frederick finally reached his limit of tolerance and burst into tears. David hurriedly took Frederick to another room. Yet, Flora didn't care at all. She continued to spout her incomprehensible theories to the relatives. I was truly furious with Flora. Everyone had adjusted their schedules for today, and buying the ingredients cost a significant amount of money. And preparing the meal was also a lot of work. I couldn't forgive Flora for ignoring all these efforts. I slapped Flora hard in earnest. The sound echoed in the room, and Flora, holding her cheek, stared at me in shock. Then my mother shouted,
I will not accept you as my granddaughter-in-law.
The relatives around probably felt the same, all staring silently at Flora. But Flora became even more hysterical, beyond help. Her eyes bloodshot, spitting saliva, she no longer listened to anyone's voice. Then David ran back, grabbed Flora by the shoulders, and shook her.
Enough! If you hate it here so much, leave right now.
David must have been thoroughly fed up with Flora's hysteria. Even Flora, regaining her senses, stormed out of the house, got into her car, and drove away with a burst of speed. Afterward, the chaos ensued. We had to clean up the scattered food on the floor. But the angry relatives were still causing a commotion. The birthday party turned into a chaotic situation. However, it was my mother's words that broke the chaos.
Everyone, be quiet. If you have time to talk, help clean up.
Realizing this, everyone quietly began to clean. Luckily, the damage to the food was minimal, and there was still plenty left, including another platter of meatloaf. Frederick had stopped crying, so he rejoined everyone. Before we started the birthday party again, I deeply apologized to the relatives. I'm truly sorry, everyone. I apologize for the trouble caused, despite you all gathering here. David also apologized deeply next to me. Please let me apologize as well. I'm sorry for the rude remarks Flora made. However, no one blamed us. Instead, they praised us for speaking up. I'm really grateful to all the relatives. With our apologies, the matter with Flora was put to rest, and we all enjoyed the meal and chatted happily. Frederick ate his meatloaf with relish, making my mother very pleased. The relatives doted on Frederick, calling his name affectionately. Despite the difficulties, the birthday party ended smoothly, and everyone dispersed. We saw off each relative one by one until only 4 of us were left in the house.
There's still cleaning up to do, right? Let me help.
It's okay. You must be worried about Flora. Why don't you head back? Upon hearing Flora's name, David sighed deeply. Actually, I've been troubled by Flora's behavior for a while now. I thought she was just tired being postpartum, but it never improved. David gazed at Frederick playing with my mother. After pondering for a while, he finally spoke up. After this incident, I've made a decision. I need to reevaluate my relationship with Flora. I might even consider divorce. I wasn't surprised at all. In fact, it seemed inevitable to me. It can't be helped. I thought I was living a smooth life, and then I got divorced. These things happen in life.
Thinking back on my past made me a bit sad. I worried that because I had divorced, David might end up doing the same.
Well, that's true. But what worries me is Frederick. The custody will probably go to Flora. There's no use worrying about that. What will be, will be.
David and I looked at each other and smiled. Somehow, an unfounded confidence that everything would work out filled our hearts. Within a month, David and Flora had divorced. I was worried about the custody, but Flora said, "I don't want him. He'll just get in the way of me remarrying," and easily gave up her parental rights. She left David's house and disappeared somewhere. So, her whereabouts are unknown. I decided to move in with David to support him, as he was busy with work. David might remarry someday, but he thought it was better to focus on work for now. My mother stayed at the family home due to old age. However, we make sure to visit the family home several times a year. She looks forward to these visits and seems to be keeping busy. Frederick was lonely for a while after Flora left. But he quickly got used to me, and now he seems very happy. Despite everything, we're living very happy days now.